All right. Well, here we are with Miss Keri-Lynne Shaw. So happy that you're here. We were formally introduced on LinkedIn, and wow, what a connection as soon as I looked at your background. So, Keri-Lynne, or KL, as she likes to go by, is the CEO and founder of the Salary Bump. Somebody I wish I would have known 25 years ago, of course, as a professional who certainly did not know how to negotiate salaries until I was well into my 40s, Keri-Lynne, no joke. I would have these conversations in the kitchen with my husband, a man, trying to figure out how to do this. So I would love to just turn it over to you to give us a quick little bio of yourself and what you do and who you are, and then we'll just kind of take it from there.
I love it. Thank you so much. So first of all, you're not alone. I was in your shoes for many, many years. And it wasn't until I fell into HR, which was a total accident, that I recognized what I was leaving on the table.
Yeah.
Because I had access to everyone's salaries, I really, really saw how much I was leaving on the table. I grew up in sales. I sold cars to pay for college, and sales, I was very dependent on myself. So either I sold a lot and I made it the money that I wanted to make, or I didn't, and that was it. So I was really always focused on, okay, well, I am going to set my own path from a financial perspective that's going to be based on me. I'm going to go all in and bet on me. When I left sales and I was no longer commission based is where I left a lot on the table. So
Yeah.
twice in my career, I was able to double my salary. And it was those two massive moments combined with being a chief people officer and seeing people that were negotiating well, and sadly, the very low numbers that were negotiating at all. So I
Right.
learned both from both of those people. That was an interesting approach. That was interesting. That was a good strategy. That sounded really good.
Yeah.
And then for those that weren't negotiating, what I'm doing today as the founder of the Salary Bump is I am pulling the curtains wide open so that people can understand that there is a whole world on the other side of that curtain that is expecting you to negotiate. So when you don't, they're surprised. They are prepared for it. And I think there's some really critical things that people are struggling with, and the reason why they're not asking, and the reason why for much of my career I didn't ask. And that was three things. One, I didn't know I could.
Yeah.
Two, I didn't know how. And three, I was always so excited about the opportunity and the job. I didn't want to come across greedy or have the company potentially pull the job offer on me. And those were really the drivers behind it, which is similar for everyone, you included, right?
Yeah,
And that's where
absolutely.
the company was born.
Well, and I have to speak to that real quick. So, last year I was working with, so we place C-suite professionals. Really, really, the CFO lane is the space that we're in predominantly. But last year, I was working with an organization. It was a very well known nonprofit organization in their CFO search. And there was a candidate that had made their way through the process, and that we were at the offer stage. And this individual did not negotiate. Offer came, offer was presented, and they said, "Where do I sign?" And because they did not negotiate anything, I mean, it could have been even something just their PTO, but because there was zero negotiation, they actually rescinded the offer. Have you ever
That
heard of
is
that? I've never seen that happen. Never, never. But it was interesting because they said it's just indicative of their ability to negotiate on behalf of us. So, anyway, I thought that was very interesting. I thought I'd throw that out based on what you just said.
it's incredibly powerful and is an indicator of what you just described, as well as your confidence level. So if somebody comes into a negotiation guns ablazing and
Yeah.
does it wrong, okay, that could really hurt you as well,
Right.
because that may or may not be how you show up when negotiating with vendors. And in finance, you're negotiating with a lot of vendors. It is a really interesting one. It's not one that I've heard a tremendous amount, but it's a beautiful story to remind people that every move of the interview process, they're observing you,
That's
They're
right.
judging you, unfortunately or fortunately, that's a reality. And they're seeing how you're going to fit inside the organization. And if you come to the table with a win-win perspective when you come into the negotiation and you come
Right.
in with confidence and you talk about the homework you've done and your value and how you're going to impact the company, they can't say no. It becomes then just a really beautiful discussion of like, you want me, I want you. Like, let's
Right.
figure out how to make this work because this is exciting and I think we can make magic together. And
Well,
if you
and
position it that way, it's just a different conversation.
I agree, and I think from their perspective, it's not even that the negotiation process was going to be, it's not that they were gonna actually earn anything additional or make any headway from that perspective. They just wanted to see how they handled the process. Were they going to ask? Were they going to advocate for themselves? Were they, and like you said, it's a confidence factor, right? Just to see, like, do they even believe in themselves enough to ask the question? And they were, I will say this was a role where they were looking for somebody that wasn't just a yes man. They wanted somebody who they thought outside the box and they were going to be okay kind of pushing the limit a little bit, and that was one of the first signs of whether or not this individual was going to be that person.
I love that so
Yeah.
much. It's a beautiful story. The other thing I think that people don't recognize is we're negotiating far more than just the salary. There is a plethora of items that you can put on the table.
Yeah.
Everything from transportation to fuel to personal development to home office stipends to, I mean, bonus equity, some of the obvious ones, PTO. There is a massive amount there that most people just aren't even thinking about.
Yeah, I agree with that.
You know what's funny? Not funny, it's actually alarming. Of my entire career in HR and thousands of offers I've made, not one person, not one, has ever asked me for the healthcare benefits package and the healthcare
No.
costs. Not one
I mean,
person.
really? That is one of the
No.
first things, it's part of my process when I'm working with an organization. The very first thing I ask them is the benefit summary, and the cost of benefits. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, my candidates are going to ask, which is interesting that they're not asking you that. Because it's one of the first things that I'm getting asked. And so I always want to be equipped with the information. But also it comes down to that negotiation piece at the end of, at the negotiation table, because they could be in an environment where they pay 100% of employee, benefits, or they pay nothing, or,
Yeah.
maybe where they're working right now, they're paying $1,200 for family, health care, but this new environment, isn't. And that just kind of all plays into the full package conversation.
We're
Yeah.
talking total comp, right?
That's right.
So I think again, it comes down to the levers that you don't necessarily know you can pull.
Yeah.
So I work with everyone from CEOs to automotive technicians. I just helped an automotive technician get a 40% raise.
Wow, that's
He was an
incredible.
hourly worker who we came up with a strategic, strategic thought process around how good he is, what he's bringing to the dealership. And by the way, master technicians are like not a dime a dozen.
Right.
Dealers are dying for them. So he was in the driver's seat. How can we get you in the driver's seat? He was perfectly in it. And what we did was we negotiated both his hourly rate, his PTO. He got 2 additional weeks of PTO, which is real money in his pocket, right?
Yeah.
As an hourly worker. We negotiated a creative bonus structure, which is something that they had never done before. And they deployed that out to the rest of the master technicians inside their dealership network because a lot of dealers have several different stores. So we
Yeah.
came up with really creative ideas, healthcare.
Yep.
We got him a car and we got his insurance covered as well, which by the way is a real easy win for a dealer who has tons and tons of cars that
Yeah.
are in their, at their disposal. So it's a bespoke opportunity for you to really look at all the levers that you have to pull and which ones do you value, which ones
Mhm.
make the most sense for you, and let's get them all on the table and let's create the comp package that is really something to talk about.
Yeah. How did you, I know you mentioned, obviously that you were a chief people officer, you've been in the HR space for a very long time. I wrote it down. It was like 18 years, right? So, and you're still a fractional HR consultant,
Yeah.
correct? Or
Mhm.
is it all in that C-level space,
Um,
predominantly?
yeah, for the fractional work that I do, I'm really a CEO advisor. So
Okay.
for CEOs that really want to change the game and want to think differently and just don't know
Yeah.
how to do it, one of the things I love to do is to elevate HR teams and help them with their playbook and help them to be real strategic business partners.
Okay.
So the CEO advisory work is where the space I have the most fun. And I love getting in and helping HR teams. Of course, I do a lot of work with exec teams because part of what the CEO generally is facing is how do we get everybody on board to
Yeah.
make the big changes that we know are going to impact us, but are a heavy lift. Whether that's diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging programs, whether that's we need to drive business results in a way we've never driven before, change management topics, mergers and acquisitions. So I work with a CEO that actually really wants to do things differently.
Mhm.
And it's been over a decade that I've been in HR and fell into HR by complete accident. I started in sales, and I actually believe that everyone should do sales in their career. It's one of the
Oh my
best
gosh, I
education.
it is, and it's such a confidence booster. I mean, yeah,
Mhm.
okay, it's gonna kill
Mhm.
your confidence on the interim, but through the process of learning to talk to your speak on the phone, advocate for yourself and your product, I think it's a wonderful education for everyone.
It really is. And so I just watched myself and other people go through this process. And I recognized that for me, money was not my driver. It still isn't my number one. But that
Yeah,
doesn't mean I don't have financial goals. It doesn't mean that I don't want to retire at a certain age where I get to make the choice. It doesn't mean that I don't want to create generational wealth. All of that I do want, but money still isn't my number one driver. With that said, time off is something, flexibility is something. Those are the things that I really value. I just recognize that I don't have to choose between the two. I can have all the things that I value
yeah,
and the money to go along with it. There's a statistic that I use quite a lot, and it's alarming that people are leaving between a million and $1.5 million on the table over their career by not negotiating.
yeah,
And of
wow,
course, that varies based on your level. That is an alarming statistic. And again, like I said, less than 50, I didn't even use a statistic yet, but less than 50% of people are negotiating. That's men and women.
mhm,
And less than 34% of women are negotiating. And that number is even lower for people of color. So the amount that is left on the table is significant.
yeah. There's no question. I mean, I can think back to once upon a time, I was, in accounting. This was before my 17 years in executive search, and I was working for a mid-cap organization. I had entered the organization at sort of a mid-level, role, let's say, making back in the day, I think it was 50K, something like that. Didn't negotiate at all, just took the
Mhm.
offer, took the job. And then short time after I was there was a controller that was there that I was reporting directly to. He left the organization, and so everything fell on my plate. Now I loved it at first because I was learning so much, and I just all of a sudden my resume. I mean, just the what I was gaining from an experience perspective was invaluable, right? That was priceless. And I saw that and I recognized that. However, eventually you've taken on all this additional responsibility. I was running payroll, so I knew what the controller was making before he left. And of course, I was his support. So now I was doing my job and his job. And oh, by the way, because I was a female in the organization, I was kind of a default executive assistant to the CEO. So I
Wow.
had all of these different roles that I was, accommodating for the organization or doing for the organization, making 55,000, $55,000 a year, whatever it was. So my husband, I was working a ton of hours, which I'm kind of a workaholic. I am one of those weirdos. I have an incredible stamina. I can work a lot of hours. That's not a good thing. I'm not wearing that as a badge of honor. It's more of a I can be taken advantage of and it takes me a minute to notice, right? Because
Yeah.
I love to work. So my husband was the one that said, you haven't you haven't gained anything and you've taken on all of this responsibility and it's been over a year. And so I said, okay, well, I guess I should ask for more. So do you know what the number was? I think it was 50K is what I was making. Do you know what I went in and asked for initially? Or what I was planning on going in and asking for? something I thought was a decent jump in compensation.
Well, you knew what your boss was making, right?
Oh, I
Which
sure
was
did.
what?
He was making 125.
Okay, so you went in and asked for a $10,000 raise? I don't know.
Yeah, I went in and asked for 60K. And,
Yeah,
I knew he was making 125 and, so I remember having the conversation with the CEO, knowing exactly what I was doing. And I said, "I want 60K or this just isn't worth it to me." And he said, "Okay, done." I'm like, "Dang it, man."
yeah.
I knew in that minute that I had left so much money on the table. And I did leave that organization 6 years later at the level that I think was a fair compensation, but I was sort of this, like, little trickle scenario where I had to, like, encourage my own self to walk in and ask for what I knew I was worth, and each time terrified
Mhm.
of him saying no. Well, okay, so what if he did say no? He wasn't
Yeah,
gonna
what's
fire
the worst
me.
case scenario,
Like,
right?
he
He
wasn't gonna
need
fire me, he needed me, or maybe he would have fired me, but it wouldn't have been immediate, so, like, I don't
Yeah.
know what I was so afraid of and so many lessons learned from that one story, and there's so many in my career.
So I would just back up a little bit, and what I would have said to you if I were your coach at that time is you don't give a number,
Yeah,
but what we do is we do your homework. Now, you already had insights that many people don't have, and that is you know what your boss was making.
yeah,
There are a million sources online where you can go in and research what the market value is based on the city and state that you live in. And we need to start normalizing the conversation of talking about what we make with our colleagues
yeah,
and our friends and our peers.
yeah,
This is something that has to change. And that was very considered very taboo in the past. But when you go in and have a conversation with your boss at that time to walk him through the impact that you're making, the work that you're doing, with a win-win attitude to say,
right,
listen, like I'm loving that the growth and learning has been phenomenal, but we do need to talk about where I am financially and the work that I've taken on. So obviously,
mhm,
so and so has left. I obviously know what he made and where I'm at, and I'd love to talk about how we close that gap.
yeah,
And then you don't say a number. So I also never ever recommend anyone use numbers. You always use ranges. So if you're doing the market value research and the market value research that you found was 75 to 150, when you have that conversation, you talk about the market value and you say, listen, I've done my homework. Recruiters call. I take the calls just because I'm curious about what's happening in the market. Not that I want to leave, but recruiters have given me also some really interesting insights on what the market ranges are.
right.
And the range is 75 to 150. So let's talk about that. What feels good for you? And then you stop talking
Yeah, great
and you
advice,
and
right?
you
Great
let
ad
him talk. Yeah. This happened to me once. And it's actually the blueprint that I created as a result of that conversation. Because I help people both find new roles, negotiate severance packages, negotiate their new roles, as well as negotiate a bump in their existing role. I had a similar situation. I was the chief people officer. I was the only woman on the board. I recognized immediately, because I do an equity analysis, first thing I do when I take over a role, and recognized how grossly negligent my CEO was in bringing me on board. He did not do the benchmark analysis. I brought it to him because I was building an equity program for the executives in the company and listing out everybody and what their pay was. And he obviously saw it very, very loudly. And he was like,
Mhm,
oh God, I had no idea. So there was a budget for the role that was just sort of thrown out, and they never did the benchmark analysis. So shame on them. Shame on me for not negotiating more. And he told me he would make it right. Insert pandemic, 6 months in, I'm I mean, it's my agenda in every single board meeting. He and I are running, like, it was madness, as you know. And 6 months into the pandemic, I was incredibly frustrated because I saw the work that I was executing, and I know he was very pleased with my performance. And
yeah,
I said, I sent him an email and I said, listen, I'd really like to talk about my compensation. Um, I put a meeting on the calendar to give him the know-how that this is coming. So
Right.
don't be
Right.
surprised. I'm not going to surprise him. And then I went through the process of taking the emotion out of it, stating the facts, talking about how I felt, and I barely got 3 sentences out, and he doubled my salary on the spot. And that, in which case, I was making 150,000 more than the CFO.
Oh,
I
wow.
almost fell out of my chair.
Yeah.
It was what I deserved, but I almost fell out of my chair. And it is it is all in how you position it. It isn't all in the homework that you do, how you prep for that conversation, and how you do it with thoughtfulness and with a win-win in mind, and that the other person also is recognizing the massive impact that you're bringing. And this isn't about you. This is about what you're doing together and
Yeah.
what you're doing for the organization and the impact and the passion that you have for driving the business forward. It's not a me, 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 me. I need this. I want this. No, no one cares. You
Yeah.
have to position it in a way that is going to let them see that they can't live without you. And to your point, if the answer is no, then I had a decision to make, right?
That's right, exactly. Well, and it's one thing to coach somebody to have a blueprint and the steps to go in and have this dialogue and this conversation. But how do you coach somebody who doesn't believe they're worthy or deserving of it? So
Mm,
that's a whole nother thing. Like you talk to these, especially women. I really do have these conversations more with women than men who have that imposter syndrome that there's always the yeah, but like I don't really think I'm not there yet because I don't have fill in the blank, whatever it is, right? They're always looking for a box to check or a blank to fill in where men are maybe not necessarily always looking for the holes that they don't fill. So
right.
how do
Well,
you
that's the
communicate
same
that?
stat that, men will apply for every job,
Yeah.
regardless of whether they hit any of the
Yeah,
requirements.
exactly.
Women won't unless they hit 100%. So
Yeah.
it's part like us getting out of our own heads. I do spend some time in the early part of the process and understanding people's relationship to money. So, do you have a scarcity mindset? When it comes to phrases like filthy rich, money doesn't grow on trees, the element of greed, and what is your association to money? And then understand what are your financial goals and then what's really, really important to you. And then I just help them bring that together and
Yeah.
help them understand that, the scarcity mindset is not helping you move forward. And it's more than just about the money.
Yeah. Right.
And so we do spend time on that in our first call to help them have a different association to it and do away with the scarcity mindset and fear also, right? So I can load their lips and we can rock and roll and do all the homework and do all the prep. They have to have the feeling that they are deserving
Yeah.
and that
Right.
they're going in confident. And I think the homework and the prep and all of that foundation is one of the ways that does help people become more confident. And sharing personal stories and sharing my story and helping them understand, I've been thrown out of the boardroom. I write all about it on LinkedIn. I'm very open book that the process is not, it's not linear.
No,
The
I agree with
process of
that.
moving us forward is like falling, getting back up. Okay, what worked last time? What didn't work last time? How do I feel? Get to the feeling, and then we can break through that.
I love that so much. I just feel like you just hit so many points. And I think the confidence, you're right. If you walk in and you have had the dialogue, you like you said, I love load their lips. You tell them what to say or give them a direction or a blueprint of how to handle the conversation or the dialogue. They are going to by default be a little more confident just because they know how to have the conversation.
Yeah.
And they've had the conversation about around their value if that's a struggle for them. You mentioned just a few minutes ago that we need to normalize talking about compensation. That needs to be something that's just out there. We're having that conversation. How in the world do I mean, and you're in New York, right? So I'm in Texas, and this is pretty. I don't know if you know, like we can still ask down here, what are you making in your current organization, which is oftentimes used against them.
So much about this question is so loaded, and
Yeah,
I hate all of it, regardless of what state you're in.
yeah,
My position is that we should be transparent about compensation proactively.
Yeah.
And asking someone what they make, first of all, they should never ever answer that question. They should always
Yeah.
talk in expectations. And the prep work that we do is about knowing what the market value is and what people in your network are getting paid. And if you don't know, you ask, hey, I know you work at this company. Tell me what a VP in your company makes. Can you give me some examples? I'm trying to get promoted and I'm meeting with a recruiter tomorrow. Asking the question so you can get a baseline and doing your homework so important. Never answer that question is
Yeah.
my advice. If you have to answer that question, I believe we should be transparent up front. Why not say, listen, this is the market research that we've done for the role and the budget for the role. This is the
Yeah.
range. How does that feel for you? Why do we put it on the candidate first? It almost
Yeah.
feels like we're backing them into a corner. And I think
I
that's
agree.
really unfair. If
Yeah,
you
I
know what
agree.
the budget is, you know what the range is, say, let's talk about that and where you might fall on that range. They might say, oh, that's a lot lower than where I'm at or what I would expect. All right, tell me more about that. Tell me more about the market research that you've done. Having that dialogue and you as the recruiter or the company being proactive to bring that forward, for me as a candidate, that says so much about what you believe in as a company, that you
Mhm.
are all about transparency and building trust from the get-go. And I would challenge organizations in your shoes. I would challenge them to say, listen, tell me about your philosophy around compensation.
Yeah.
What are your values of the company? And if your values are trust and transparency, then we need to change our approach when we're going after candidates so that that matches what you value as an organization.
Yeah.
I'm super turned off by recruiters or companies that won't answer that question up front, that they demand that you answer it. It just feels really icky and
Yeah,
shady.
I agree. I won't even so once upon a time, when I first got into this industry, I was working for a multi, billion dollar staffing and search firm. And that is how I learned this industry back in like 2008, right? And that was one of the things we were taught is when you get on, when you start to interview and screen a candidate, you have to find out what they make. And if they won't tell you, then you tell them you can't represent or work with them. Terrible, right? And
Mhm.
that is how I was trained in this industry. Now, keep in mind, that was 17 years ago. Obviously, I have grown and I've learned, and I don't do that. I don't operate that way. I won't operate that anymore. Now it is, how I phrase it, and I would love to know your thoughts on this, Keri-Lynne, is my first question is, what are you targeting? What is your range? And if they want to share, oftentimes they will share with me. Um, but I never ever ask anymore, what are you currently making?
Yeah.
Is what is important to you? And from a package perspective, of course, I'm also in the C-suite, so that makes a little bit of a difference. But what are you targeting from a package perspective, and what's important to you? And
Yeah.
that's how I
Beautifully
target it.
asked. Beautifully asked, beautifully said. I would also, again, proactively say, listen, these are the values of the company.
Yeah,
And these are the things that are really important to them. They value your health. And they have a really like one of the most robust healthcare programs that I've ever experienced. Let's talk a little bit about that. They value flexibility and being able to work from anywhere. They value investment in people and they have development budgets for everyone in the organization, not just the
right.
C-suite. These are the things the company values because then they're able to say, oh, that's intriguing. Oh, I didn't even think of that. So I think
Mhm.
even positioning when you're pitching the company,
Yes.
before you even get to the package part, I would state those things and why you even said yes to work with this company, because I'm assuming that you're selective in the kinds of organizations that also that you work with that match your values,
That's exactly right.
right?
And
Because
we
you're putting a lot on the line here. I
Yep.
would say that's how I would lead in. And then tell me, how does that feel for you? Like, wow, it's very different than my current toxic environment, or,
Yeah.
that sounds really intriguing. Some of the things that are really important to me that you didn't mention are this. So let's talk now about what's important to you. I gave you the foundation. What are some of those things? And then if you happen to know what their philosophy is, if we pay in the 67th percentile, we pay in the 50th percentile, what if they have a philosophy, which many companies don't, but if they do, you can also share that. And the reason why they're in the 50th percentile is because of the plethora of unbelievable benefits that they offer, that they
Mhm.
believe are the retention tool for employees. Then the person knows what to expect
Yeah,
when we get to
exactly.
the salary conversation. You can say, listen, here's what the market says. What's a little bit unfair is we have states, 8 of us, that have to put the ranges when jobs are posted. And I can almost guarantee you most companies have not done their homework on what the market is paying. This is
Yeah.
the budget for my role.
No,
Some of them
I can tell you, by and large, the majority of my organizations that I partner with, I have to educate them, on compensation and if they're in line with the market.
yeah. So it's like it's a bit of a crapshoot with these companies. And I
Yeah.
think unless they have a recruiter like you who are advocating and helping them to understand it, your people are going into something that they really don't know. So I'm not even sure that these 8 states that this is making a massive difference. The fact that they have to post, I think pay transparency should be something every organization takes on as
Yeah.
a retention tool and a way to really enhance the employee experience, which is here's what a career looks like inside the organization. Here's how you
Right.
can grow developmentally, financially, and here's what that looks like. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about your growth. And then having these proactive discussions gives people the feeling of, okay, wow, okay, my company really cares about me enough to share with me where I am in the range and how
Mhm.
I can grow. I mean, how easy is that? It's not hard.
I agree with you. I do think though, however, just with the compensation shifting so much in the last really 5, because it started pre-COVID where it was, and especially in the accounting and finance space, which is where I am,
Yeah.
there's such a shortage of skilled talent that there's been a huge increase just to retain and attract. We'll just attract. We'll start with attract and then retain individuals. So compensations have been all over the place.
Because when you're willy-nilly, you're all over the place, you're not setting yourself up for success, and
Mhm.
you're it's a very short-term thinking. So I tend to want to work with companies that are thinking bigger and thinking
Yeah,
for the long game. And the long game is looking at how do we create an environment that builds trust?
yeah,
And the best way to do that, and if you do that, your employees are working harder for you. It's a win for everyone. But for me, that's the most important factor. And being all over the place, I've walked into many companies that are all over the place, by the
yeah,
way.
yeah,
And my job as the chief people officer is to look at the equity analysis. That's the first thing that I do when I take over a role, because I need to see where we have holes, how we need to fill them, what are the gaps.
right.
And that's important from a DEIB standpoint as well, right? How do we create an environment where diversity is important to us, as is inclusion, but diversity can be important to you. But if you don't have the E, the I, and the B, none of it matters. And that's the part that's the underbelly that we're talking about. And, compensation is just one of the elements, but it's an important one that I would say is not on the radar of a lot of CEOs. They don't recognize the importance of it. And it's
Mhm.
actually a massive driver to retention and employee engagement.
Right. Well, and even the conversation of, what drives you. Like you just, you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that or our conversation that you're not completely driven by money. That's not the most important thing to you. And, admittedly, probably not the most important thing to me either, but it is what pays the bills. It is what, pays my mortgage. It is what makes it possible for me to check those life goal boxes that we all want to check. And so I do think we do have to, that's another thing I think we should normalize is saying that we do work for money. We're not just working for experience. We're not just working to build our resume. We are, in fact, working for money. That's the reason that we all have jobs. Let's be real. So, and I think that has always been historically sort of like a shameful thing to say out loud. And I think we've got to get more open and candid about, oh, nope, that's why we work. Let's just call it what it is,
Yeah.
right? Organizations, unless they're a nonprofit, are working for revenue, right? They're building something there's a mission behind that revenue number, obviously, that's driving everything, but they're out there to build and grow those organizations, right? Much like the individual underneath the roof of those organizations, we're there for money too. So, yeah, I what do you well, first of all, tell me how you find how do people find you?
Yeah. So my website, Instagram, and TikTok is the Salary Bump everywhere. And on LinkedIn, Keri-Lynne Shaw, I post 4 to 5 times a week. I'm very consistent with my posts. I'm very open with
Mhm.
personal stories. I'm very open with a lot of free tips. On my website, I've got some free downloads as well. My real mission is to help people know their worth and their value and get them paid what they deserve and get in the driver's seat of their career. And again, that's beyond just the compensation
It
elements.
is. Yep.
It's the confidence to ask for the promotion. It's all of the factors. And really, like I said, that peek behind the HR curtain to know what HR is thinking. I share a lot of client stories, and my goal is to really impact the world, but also do my part in closing the gender pay gap. So I work with men and women, but
Yeah.
closing the gender pay gap is extremely important. So, like I said, I work with all levels. I love also that early career stage where people are really like getting these tools now that you and I didn't have at a much earlier stage in our career. That's how we close the gap. That's how
Yep.
we close that
That's right.
$1 to $1.5 million we're leaving on the table. Working with the C-suite, is not as complicated, I would say. But my average client makes 30 to 50% more than expected or
Well,
that
that's
they were
impressive.
offered. I think there's also an element of where are male allies
Mhm.
and how are they also advocating for equality? And I think this
Right.
is something really important. So I just did a panel for a group of lawyers, and most of them are women. There was maybe 5 men there, and interesting because they negotiate for a living, but
Yeah.
all of them struggled with negotiating for themselves. And there was a conversation at the end. There was a cocktail hour, and I was talking to a woman and a gentleman, and they work for the same company. And he said, "Oh yeah, I just finalized my negotiation for the year, and you know, all the different elements that we negotiate as attorneys." And the woman standing next to him was like, "Oh, I haven't signed mine yet. What did you negotiate?" And he was like, "Boom, boom, boom. You need to add that. You need to
Oh,
add that.
wow.
You need
That's
to add that." And
nice.
he was advocating for her.
Oh,
So he was advocating for her and helping her load her lips based on what he negotiated.
I
The
love
sad
that.
part is, though, this should be happening behind closed doors.
Yeah.
Companies should care about equity because, oh, by the way, there's legal ramifications if you don't. Like, this is not just a willy-nilly nice to have. You need to do this or you will
Yeah.
have potential discrimination situations on your hands. So companies that are not doing it, it's a real miss. But obviously, the more male advocates we can get, we need more chief people officers that are driving this topic home. We need CFOs that are driving this topic home. We just need
Yeah.
everybody to be putting it on the table as something that's important to us, and getting the CEO to see that how much money we're leaving on the table by not having a comp philosophy and not doing this right.
Yeah. I agree with you. So, I want my gosh, I would love to be a advocate of yours. And, if you're comfortable, I'd even love to have your name on my website, just to click here to take, people to your website to bring awareness to what you're doing, because it's so essential. It's so important. I love what you're saying about normalizing the conversations, so many different conversations, but definitely the compensation conversation. And it really just starts with these conversations, right? And having them out there for others to hear and feel comfortable sharing the same message.
I love that. I actually also do work with quite a few recruiters who advocate for their clients to hire me because your clients don't necessarily have skin in the game. If
Yeah.
you're working on behalf of the company and the client,
Yeah.
but having a client that is confidently showing up, because you don't know in the conversations that they are having with the company if the salary conversation comes up.
Yeah.
could come
Well,
up
that's
while
what I'm
they're in
thinking
talks.
is I'd love to advocate for what you're doing and recommend people to talk to you that are my candidates. Just because I do think they need to have this. I mean, I can of course coach, right? I can share, best practices and I can give them a blueprint, so to speak, but is not at the same level as what you're doing. And you can really just pour in from a time perspective, and it's just a bigger, broader message and conversation. How often do you, or how long would you say you work with somebody on average?
So my one-on-one coaching. So I have two different ways that people can work with me. One is a digital program that's self-guided,
Okay.
and it's approximately $500. People go through the program at their own pace. It's 50 different short and snappy videos with worksheets, and they go through it at their own pace.
Okay.
The other alternative is they work with me one-on-one, and that is 4 sessions, and we go through it pretty fast and furious. Most of my clients, it depends on where they are in the process, how many of those sessions they will use, but they can use those if they only use 2 of them, because we're just like rock and roll. Let's land the plane.
Yeah.
More often than not, if they use 2 to 3 and then they carry the other session on within a year, they can use it
Okay.
however they want, onboarding. And then I add a 5th session because I want them to, at the 1 year mark, revisit this conversation to say, okay, here's where you are. How are you feeling? How are you going to approach the conversation now at the
Right.
at your annual review? And it just gives them another boost to be able to get a proper increase as well.
Okay. Well, I would love to have a link on my website to yours. If you're
Love it.
comfortable with that, I would just love for people to be able to find you via that way. Because I know there's people that I work with every single day that need you and need what you provide.
Thank you. Yeah,
You're
it's
welcome.
most people say to me, Kale, where were you 20 years ago? And
Yeah.
I wasn't there for myself. So, this is sort of the evolution of why we are here and how we're going to change the game. So I appreciate that so much. I also do a lot of speaking engagements, a lot of women's groups. I go into companies like Chief, where I help people in a wider group have this conversation and start to normalize the conversation. So this is something else that I do.
Well, I appreciate you being open to having this conversation. I mean, like I mentioned earlier to everyone that's listening, we did not know one another. We had not had any conversations prior to this. So it's just, it was an outreach. Hey, you wanna? And she was so gracious to say yes. And I really appreciate that. It's so relevant what you do to what I do. So I was just really, really excited to talk to you, not just from what you do for others, but even just from my own personal stories. I'm like you just said, where were you?
Yeah,
Where was
thank you
someone
so
like
much.
you? You're welcome. You're welcome. Well, I
It's
really is there anything that you'd like to add before we conclude?
it's I just was going to say it's conversations like this that are going to change the game
I agree.
and truly make an impact on the world, and for more people to get in the driver's seat. This is the goal. This is my mission. And I'm just thrilled and honored that you reached out. I'm really thrilled to be here. And I hope your audience took something great away.
Oh, unquestionably, unquestionably. Well, thank you again. I appreciate you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.